Today we are going to get to the bottom of why you can't seem to be able to articulate your thoughts with the same clarity that you see them in your head, and how to fix that so that you can communicate more effectively in any situation. Now, the experience of leaving a conversation dissatisfied with the way you conveyed your thoughts may not be foreign to you. For me personally, especially after starting my YouTube channel, I found myself struggling with expressing my seemingly complex ideas with the same degree of nuance that appear in my mind's eye, whether while I'm talking to the camera or even when I'm scripting my videos. And even before that, if you've been on this channel before, then you know that I have worked in academic research, where presenting complex topics to an audience regularly is just part of the job. Obviously, when your words fail to do the brilliant idea in your head justice, this leads to frustration. And this frustration has prompted me to dig into why this happens. Because often the path from thoughts to words appears to be a lot more linear than it actually is. And as it turns out, this disconnect between clear thinking and clear speaking is not just anecdotal or imagined, but rather rooted in cognitive, linguistic, and psychological factors. And this is what we are going to explore today. And we will also dive into some actionable steps that should help bridge the proverbial gap between thinking clearly and speaking clearly. So through my research and reading on the subject, I was able to narrow it down to 4 main reasons for this discrepancy. The first reason why this happens is that our thoughts are a lot more complex than language. Now, intuitively, you might think that if you struggle to express your thoughts clearly, then it must be a language proficiency problem, especially if you are trying to communicate in a language that is different from the one that you speak natively. But the truth is a bit more nuanced than that, because inherently, thoughts and language are of completely different natures. Thoughts are multidimensional, more abstract, and often involve a complex array of emotions, associations, and sensations. They can involve intuitive insights, which are what your subconscious mind internalizes without some clear conscious comprehension by your conscious mind. You know, when you say, "I just have an intuition about this thing," it's because your subconscious mind sends some subtle cues that are hard to explain by your logical mind. Cognitive scientist Steven Pinker argues that thoughts are represented in the brain by a nonverbal abstract code he terms mentalese. And translating this code to language, which is one-dimensional and linear, is very much an imperfect process and leads to much being lost in the process. Your mind isn't just thinking in words. Thoughts are this complex mixture of images, emotions, abstract concepts, and sometimes things that we can't even put into words. Our brains can process these ideas super fast, while language is much slower. When you think, your mind might jump between ideas, make connections, and feel things all at the same time. But when you speak, you are forced to translate that beautiful mess into neat, structured sentences. It's like trying to paint a beautiful, nuanced landscape with a box of just 6 crayons. Now, while part of the discrepancy could be attributed to the inherent nature of thoughts as we have just discussed, the other part lies within our mastery of the language. It still holds that in order to be able to convey nuanced ideas with an already limited and limiting tool, one would need to master using that tool to its fullest extent. That is to say, one of the reasons for the disconnect between thought and speech is the lack of vocabulary. Sometimes the concepts or emotions we are trying to convey do not have direct equivalents in the language, or we simply do not have the linguistic knowledge to convey them accurately. Linguistic anthropologist Edward Sapir and his student Benjamin Lee Whorf proposed the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which suggests that language influences thought, and which can help explain why we sometimes struggle to express ourselves clearly. If our thoughts are shaped by the language we speak, then the limitations of that language can restrict our ability to convey certain ideas. For example, in German there is a word called Schadenfreude, which pretty much means the joy derived from somebody else's misery, which does not really have a direct equivalent in English. So as an English speaker, you cannot really express this thought succinctly without resorting to lengthy explanations. Even if a word exists to describe a certain situation or state, and we might recognize it when we read it in a context, it might not reside within our active vocabulary or lexicon. Studies have shown that a person's active vocabulary, i.e., the vocabulary that they regularly use, is much smaller than their passive vocabulary, that is, the vocabulary that they know and understand but rarely use. In fact, a person's average active lexicon is only 1/3 of their passive lexicon. And this discrepancy can lead to situations where people know what they want to say, but can't retrieve the right words in the moment. The second reason is simply a speed issue. The human brain processes thoughts at an astonishing speed. Research estimates that humans can think at a rate of 4,000 words per minute, whereas the average person is able to output 125 to 150 words per minute. And this difference between the speed of thought and the speed of speech creates a bottleneck effect, where our thoughts are racing ahead and our speech lagging behind. Not to mention that our ability to speak clearly and convert thoughts into words is largely influenced by our emotional state. So if we are stressed or sad, then our judgment is clouded and we can't put our finger at what we are feeling exactly to be able to put it into words. Or when we are excited and we are compelled to speak quickly to keep pace with our thoughts, which can lead to disjointed speech and incomplete sentences, or the use of filler words like and like. All this leaves us feeling that we are unable to express ourselves as clearly as we think. The third reason for the gap between thinking and articulation is the cognitive effort involved with speaking. Thinking is often automatic and fluid, whereas speaking and articulation often requires more mental resources. According to the cognitive load theory, which explains how humans use and process information, performing tasks with high cognitive load limits our ability to perform other tasks effectively. Speaking and articulating our thoughts, especially in a situation that is more complex or under pressure, places a significant cognitive load on the brain. It requires us to organize our thoughts logically, choose the right words from a large mental lexicon, form grammatically correct sentences, and monitor the social vibe and adjust in real time based on the social context and the listener's reaction. This multitasking of cognitive processes can lead to omitting important details or verbal misuse. So the more complex or emotionally charged our thoughts are, the more difficult it becomes to communicate them without sacrificing depth or clarity. Another key factor in the gap between thought and speech is that our thoughts are not as clear and well-defined as we imagine them to be. The psychologist and behavioral economist Daniel Kahneman proposes in his book Thinking Fast and Slow that humans often rely on System 1 thinking, which is fast, intuitive, and often imprecise. This system operates quickly and provides quick judgments, but lacks the analytical depth of System 2 thinking, which is slower and more deliberate and requires logical reasoning and effort. So when we try to articulate thoughts that were generated through System 1 thinking, we might realize in the process that our thoughts are not as well formed and fleshed out as they seem to be. And the act of speaking can force us to confront the vagueness or contradictions in our thoughts, which can lead to pauses and incomplete expressions, and the feeling that we did not do our ideas justice with our words. Now, naturally, it is frustrating when you have a crystal clear, fully formed idea in your head that you just can't seem to be able to convey with the same brilliance. But it's not hopeless. Not entirely, at least. After all, there are some fascinating speakers who seem to be able to express themselves effortlessly. And while some of it is talent, like everything else, it can be trained. And I would like to share some of the strategies that worked best for me. The first strategy, which goes without saying, is expanding your active lexicon. While part of the problem is due to the inherent nature of the complexity of thought, which is to some degree out of our hands, the other part, which is getting better command of language, is within our control. Two things that helped me greatly in enriching my active lexicon are reading and podcasts, especially paying attention to how skilled communicators phrase their thoughts. If I particularly like a phrasing that I came across, I have the habit of writing it down in a page of my notes dedicated for that, and then actively trying to incorporate it in my speech or writing. And aside from that, the more knowledge you have in a particular subject, the easier it is to access your thoughts in that subject. If you think of ChatGPT, for example, it excels at articulating ideas and concepts even when you provide it with the vaguest fragment of a thought. It seems to just have an intuition where you are trying to go with that. And it is able to retrieve information with high linguistic precision. But it's mainly because it has read a lot on different subjects and learned the context in which different words occur, which makes it easier to construct meaningful sentences around them. The second strategy is to buy time. When you are asked a question, there can often be an instinct to answer immediately, which can lead to rushed or unclear responses because it takes seconds or fractions of seconds for your brain to filter through the influx of thoughts and try to find the words to express them. But I find that if you reiterate the question while expanding on it, it helps to 1. Guide you and organize your thoughts, and 2. Avoid there being an awkward moment of silence that you feel obliged to fill with words like and like. For example, let's say that somebody asks you the question, how do you think AI will affect job markets in the next decade? You can start by saying, that is an interesting question. So you are asking about the impact of AI on job markets over the next 10 years. If we break that down, there are several layers to consider. On one hand, there is the concern that automation and AI can lead to replacing jobs that are mainly manual, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, we can also think about the opportunities that AI can create, blah, blah, blah. And then there is the question of how fast will this transition take to happen, and so on. It's pretty much like thinking out loud, but in a more deliberate manner. The third strategy is chunking. We have established that the speed of thoughts cannot be matched by the speed of words, but there is something that you can do to mitigate the gap, and that is try to observe your thoughts as they occur and place them into broad categories. Then you can go back to each and expand on it. It helps especially if you are able to write them down, or if you are talking in real time, you can just simply state them. This is particularly powerful because our short memory is pretty short, ranging between 15 to 30 seconds. So if you write down the main ideas or say them out loud, you avoid the chance of forgetting them. So if we take the example from before, which is how AI will affect job markets in the next 10 years, maybe you can already identify 3 points you would like to elaborate on: the concern of job replacement, the opportunity of job creation, and the timescale of the transition. The third strategy is to declutter your mind. The more you think about issues or subjects that are of interest to you, the more you clarify your understanding and formulate thoughts better in your head, which means that they are easier to retrieve when you need to speak about them. Some might do this through meditation. Now, I personally don't have a dedicated meditation practice. I rather regularly do thinking and toying around with ideas as a hobby, which means that some topics are easier for me to access because I have already formed clear thoughts about them. And I think we all do this to some degree. However, if you have the problem that you rather think too much and overthink, then you might want to check out this video that I made about this.